flame worked this bead, this glass bead, at the torch on a 20 millimeter mandrel. And when I first began making glass beads that had very large holes, I tried cleaning out the holes and even semi-polishing them in order to make them look better. But in the end, I decided that I really prefer the look of a silver cuff or a rivet, and I'd like to show you how I achieve that. I was never trained as a silversmith or a jeweler. Everything that I do in the studio is based on experimenting and using the little bits of knowledge that I've accumulated over the years. I think that this video is something that I wish I had when I first began. So, sharing really what honestly happens in the studio is a way of sharing knowledge. Here I'm making a mock-up with paper of the cuff that I want to create in silver. And what's nice about the paper is it gives me the ability to work out dimensions that I need before cutting and shaping the silver itself. It's a stiff paper is a great way to begin and becomes a really valuable tool. I try to plan ahead for the silver cuff to be a really close fit. And while I can hammer the final cuff larger, or I can sand the inside of this glass bead to be a little bit larger, it is much easier to plan from the beginning to have as close a fit possible that you can have. I've accumulated a little collection of silversmithing tools over the years, but all of this is really very possible to do with very simple tools that you might have at hand. I spend a lot of time fitting and filing the sides of the seam so that they meet or touch each other as tightly as possible. I'll check again and again to see if I can see light passing through the space before I solder it. And I find that with this kind of preparation, the solder will flow really smoothly where I want it to go, and the seam will, if it's well prepared, it will disappear quite nicely. So I really suggest taking your time at this step and prepping that seam uh, really well before you go to solder. Here I'm using a hard solder, and I like to use a hard solder because I like how that solder matches the color of the silver better than soft solders can. And in the end, it leaves a less visible line on the finished piece where that connection was made in the cuff. In this setup, I like to pick solder. It's just what I'm most comfortable doing for small work, and I'm attaching the solder on the outside of the cuff, and I'm really not worried about leaving a little mess there or any little blobs of solder that might be visible, because on that side it's going to be completely hidden inside of the bead. After the cuff is soldered and pickled, I work to make it round, and I'm trying to mimic the shape of the glass, hole. I like to use whatever I have around the studio. In this case, I'm using some random DAPs that I have that are approximately the right diameter. A perfect fit would be great, but slightly smaller works really well. And basically, any round steel object will do the trick. You can see that I'm working over a small divot in my stump so that the ring of silver will rotate freely around and not get misshapen by the hammering. As I'm getting closer to a nice round ring, I like to check several times to see if I've gone too far in stretching the silver. I'm shooting for a tight fit, but in some cases, if I've gone too far and the cuff becomes too large, then I'll have to sand a little bit of the glass from inside the hole in order to correct the fit. But here, in this example, it's working out to be a really great fit. It's super important to clean up the edges of the silver and not leave any little nicks or saw marks in that outside ring, as anything that is like a little nick or a mark can initiate a tear in the silver when you're actually creating the rivet and asking it to stretch. So this stage is really important. Now it's time to determine how much width I will need. And this is really a matter of personal preference. The wider the silver is, the more material that you're going to have to move and actually fold over the glass. And if the cuff is not very wide, then the rivet is going to appear less prominent. And I really like a pretty substantial fold over. The risk of a really big fold over is that you're asking the silver to move that much more, and it can result in a crack or a tear in the silver. But I've been able to work a pretty good stretch out of the silver over the years by really working carefully and slowly. So I'll show you how it works here. I like to do a final annealing of the cuff before I start the rivet. All the hammering that I did in order to get the cuff to this point, to the size that I wanted, can stiffen the metal. And I really find that this helps by annealing it to avoid any tearing or cracking. So taking the time to make another annealing step ends up being really worth it in the end. The tool that I like to begin with these days is a little arbor press. I will make a note in the show notes of the one that I'm using, but there are a couple on the market, and I've even used a really basic shop drill press and modified it with bits in order to do the same job. This funny shaped steel is a random bit from a pewter manufacturer that I found at a yard sale many years ago. It is a really great shape. But I think that if I didn't have this, then I would use a piece of hardwood, either flat or shaped a little bit, like this piece of steel. And again, the trick is to experiment with what you have. So either steel or wood. I think either one would definitely work. in my experience, working slowly is the key. Although it seems like, these tools can do the job in just a couple moves, the slower I ask the metal to move, the less likely it is to tear. So I also like to work in this way, so I don't mistakenly drop the glass on the floor, or even worse, crack the glass by pressing too much or too quickly with the press. I've made all of these mistakes. So again, working slowly is really the key. I think this stage seems like the scariest. Hammering next to glass can definitely be tricky. Of course, if you hit the glass, you could definitely chip it. Here, I'm hammering directly on the silver, and the glass itself is not receiving any blows. Um, the glass is, in fact, not even being hammered at all. Again, little by little is definitely the key. I'm not rushing the process. I have a collection of chasing tools that I've collected over the years, and I like to work with them. If you don't have a specific chasing tool, you can definitely make one on your own pretty simply. Um, the step is just to adapt, and you could make a chasing tool with, let's say, a heavy nail or even a steel mandrel. You can polish and file it, the top of it, to any shape that you need, and you really make something that is specific for what form you want to work with. I think that this is my favorite part of the process, even though there are many parts that I love. Um, it's this finishing touch that I think makes the rivet look so great. It takes a little time to get just the right angle, but the idea is to make the silver look like it is tucked in as much as possible against the glass. The nice part is that if you have a hole, it's not exactly regular. You can form the silver to follow even undulating glass with this chasing tool quite nicely. And in the end, it gives you really this beautiful finish where the silver and the glass meet, and it can be just a really nice finished touch. That's not going to help me. The final stage of sanding and polishing is really a matter of personal preference. Sometimes I like to leave the hammer marks visible if I think they look beautiful against the glass. Sometimes I like to polish them off. Here I'm polishing all the hammer marks. And one thing to be aware of is that whatever polishing wheels you're using, make sure that you're only polishing the silver. If you slip and touch the glass, then you can definitely leave a mark on the glass where you might not want one. So really pay attention when you're doing this. Sometimes you can even mask off with some tape the glass as you're working, and carefully polish just the silver. It feels so rewarding at the end of the process when you can see the silver and the glass combined and really working well together. I hope that by watching me work, you'll feel inspired to experiment on your own and even invent new ways of doing things or adapt tools to your needs. The idea is just to create and enjoy that process of making.